Thanks, Martin.
Okay, thanks, James. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's AFP Grey Fleet Management webinar. We've got 112 people actually registered to go on the seminar, which is really exciting and great that we've had so much interest in this. We've got some great sessions and a really varied panel of guests today, covering the myths, cash allowance takers and occasional business travellers, and the challenges that fleet managers face in dealing with those different types of drivers and how to best deal with those. So my name's Martin Evans, so I'm an AFP board member, Risk and Compliance Committee Chair. I'm also, I've got Emma Loveday, who's Risk and Compliance Committee Deputy Chair. Emma's going to be running today's session and she's Senior Fleet Consultant at VW. Over to you, Emma.
Thanks very much, Martin. Thank you everyone for joining us this morning. It's really great to see such a big audience that has joined us this morning to talk about grey fleet. Who knew? It was so exciting. So I'm joined this morning by three very experienced and respected fleet managers in our industry. They've kindly volunteered to be panelists on this webinar and give us an insight into their own grey fleet vehicles and driver populations and how they manage this within their own organisations. I think it's really important to say that they're from very different businesses. Grey fleet is not an easy thing to manage. And they're all at different stages on their journey. It is incredibly challenging to manage grey fleet, and by, as the name suggests, there is a lot of potential confusion or grey areas when looking at this part of our fleet and driver population. So we have joining us today Elaine Pringle, who is Fleet Manager for Scottish Water, Matt Neale, Fleet Manager for Platform Housing Group, and also Matt Hammond, Head of Fleet for Altrad UK. So gentlemen and lady, if I could hand over to you just to give a brief introduction to yourselves, that would be great. Elaine, would you like to start?
Perfect, thank you, Emma. So good morning, everyone. My name is Elaine Pringle and I'm the Fleet Manager at Scottish Water. We operate and own a large commercial vehicle fleet of around 1,300 vans, 120 HGVs and about 400 items of plant, and they're based all over Scotland, so quite a geographical challenge there. And in addition to our fleet, we have a number of grey fleet drivers, so employees driving their own personal vehicle for business journeys, and I'm going to talk to you a bit about how we manage that today. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Matt?
Good morning, everybody. I'm Matt Neale from Platform Housing Group. I manage the fleet of 500 commercial vehicles. We've got some trailers and some other bits of kit as well, but we also have over 1,000 employees who are eligible to be a grey fleet driver. So that's why I'm on the call today.
Thank you very much. And finally, Matt Hammond.
Morning all, Matt Hammond, Head of Fleet for Altrad Services. Been in post here for about 8 years. We've got a fleet of about 1,100 vehicles operating across the UK, from the Shetland down to the South Coast. Everything's going off at the same time there. A mixture of cars, vans, trucks and grey fleet in those. We've been running grey fleet now for probably about 10 years across the business. So yeah, we've got a bit of history on this and a few false starts along the way.
Fantastic, thank you. Can I have the next slide, please, James? So this is our agenda for the webinar this morning. We'll start with explaining duty of care that employers have when managing grey fleet. We'll give a brief explanation of what actually grey fleet is, and then following that, what constitutes a business journey. We'll then hear from each of our panellists in turn. They'll be sharing, like I've said before, their own experiences and insights on how they manage their grey fleet or intend to manage their grey fleet within their own organisations. We'll then have an interactive Q&A session where I'll be putting questions from you, our delegates on the call today, to our panellists to answer. There is a chat function available on the webinar today, so please do use it throughout. If you have any questions, I will be monitoring it as best I can. So if you have any specific questions for a panellist during the presentation, Where I can, I will ask them at the end of their presentations. Anything that I haven't picked up, we can come back to and circle back to at the end during that Q&A session. Finally, we have a poll question as well that we would like to put to you today. There'll be voting buttons available within the webinar for you to use when we get to it, and we'll conclude then with a final summary and closing with Martin. So let's get started. Next slide, please, James. So I thought it might be useful just to set the scene a little bit and just to, yes, be useful and just have some and be a little bit interesting for you just to give some stats on the grey fleet in the UK. So 40% of UK work vehicles are grey fleet, 14 million, there are 14 million grey fleet vehicles in use on UK roads, and 62% of private car use is for work-related activity. So it's clearly quite a significant part of our fleets of vehicles that are on UK roads today. Next slide, please, James. So when it comes to managing employees that drive for work, the law is really, really clear. An organisation has a legal duty of care to an employee, regardless of that vehicle ownership. So the grey fleet needs to be managed as diligently as company-owned or leased vehicles. The Health and Safety at Work Act applies just as much to on-road work activities as to any other work activity. So employers have duties under health and safety law for these on-road work activities, including business journeys that are undertaken in privately owned vehicles. So the Act states that employers must, so far as reasonably practicable, ensure the health and safety of all employees while at work, and this includes any driving undertaken on behalf of the employer. The Health and Safety Executive, so the HSE, also specifically references grey fleet in their guidance and the requirement that it needs to be suitably and adequately managed. That's within their recently updated driving and riding for work guidance. It's definitely worth taking a look at that on the HSE website if you haven't read it or aren't familiar with it. It's really, really useful if you are managing road risk for your organisation. So kind of in summary, really, the driver, their welfare and the consequences of their actions are the responsibility of their employer whilst they are travelling on business. Again, that is regardless of vehicle ownership. So if you have vehicles and employees within your organisation that are classed as grey fleet, there are some key things that you need to be aware of and some key checks that you need to carry out on the vehicles and the drivers of those vehicles. And our panellists today will detail that in their own presentations. Next slide, please, James. So just quickly, what is grey fleet? So they are vehicles which are owned privately and driven by an employee and used for business purposes. Employees that use their own vehicle for work-related journeys are called grey fleet drivers and are very much still subject to the same duty of care requirements as any other employee with a company-provided vehicle. They will typically be reimbursed on a pence per mile basis for that work-related journey that they undertake. And employees that are in receipt of a cash allowance are also classed as grey fleet drivers. So you have cash allowance and then you have those occasional business drivers as well within your organisations, all come under that grey fleet banner. Next slide, please, James. And then just finally, before I hand over to the panellists, it's really important to understand what actually constitutes a business journey, as this will ensure that you are capturing all of your grey fleet and all of your grey fleet drivers within your organisations. So a business journey can be defined as a journey that is undertaken as part of performing the employee's duties, regardless of where the journey begins and ends and regardless of vehicle ownership. So a journey between an employee's home and their ordinary regular workplace or workplace that's kind of identified within their contract of employment, that's known as ordinary commuting. So wouldn't be classed as a grey fleet vehicle or a grey fleet driver. However, a journey between an employee's home and then any other workplace that an employee needs to go to, that will genuinely be classed or generally be classed as a business journey. Mileage can be claimed on that journey, and therefore the driver and the vehicle are subject to the necessary checks and requirements of grey fleet. And then a journey between two business premises for work purposes is also classed as a business journey as well. Next slide, please, James. So I'm now going to hand over to our industry fleet experts who are going to share their own experiences and insights into managing grey fleets within their own organisations. So first up is Elaine. Over to you, Elaine. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Emma. And that was really useful just to define what grey fleet is. I think there's sometimes a bit of misconception around about that. So that was a great summary there. So I spoke earlier during my introduction about the size of our fleet. So I'm now predominantly going to focus on our drivers. So in terms of drivers, Scottish Water have around 4,000 employees who drive on business journeys. And we split those drivers into categories depending on what type of vehicle they drive. So either a commercial vehicle, such as a van or an HGV, our leased cars under our jobs needs scheme, and then we have our grey fleet drivers. So as Emma just touched on there, everyone driving their own personal car for business journeys and claiming mileage expenses. So Scottish Water work with an external company driver check to complete our driver licence checks for all of these drivers. And the driver category determines the frequency and types of checks that are completed. So just as we treat our commercial vehicle drivers, we do the same with our grey fleet drivers as well. So for our grey fleet drivers, we've got around 2,500 people driving their own personal car for work. We complete driver licence checks every 12 months. And in addition to the licence checks, we also complete what's known as grey fleet checks. So whatever vehicle they're driving for that business journey, we'll check the tax and the MOT status of the vehicle. And we also check to make sure that they've got their own personal car insurance and that it covers business use as well. So that's a key factor there. So as Emma touched on, commuting is anything between home and the workplace, which is covered by most insurance policies. But in order to cover grey fleet driving where they're doing business journeys, it must also cover business use. So in addition to licence checks, we also do a number of activities across our full employees in relation to driver safety and also compliance. So for example, we issue monthly bulletins that will include things on changes to our internal driver policies and procedures, as well as pre-use checks and also some changes that will happen in the industry. So any updates to the highway code, for example. And we also participate in events such as Breaks Road Safety Week. So we arrange on-site activities. So we'll have people come along with their own personal vehicles and we'll carry out free vehicle checks for all employees to make sure that the vehicles are in a safe and roadworthy condition, and also talk them through the types of checks they should be doing on the vehicle prior to setting off in the morning to make sure that the vehicle is safe and roadworthy. So things like checking the tyres, checking the lights, and we talk them through that. And then in addition, we have got a number of alternatives to grey fleet. So where possible, we encourage people to use alternative means of transport. That's from an environmental perspective as well as safety and compliance. But we do also have alternatives where people can use pool cars that are located across Scotland at each of our offices. So they can use them for business journeys. We also operate a lease car scheme for our managers and our jobs needs drivers. So for jobs needs drivers, anyone that's doing over 9,000 miles per year would be eligible to join the jobs needs scheme. And we've just recently launched a salary sacrifice scheme with Tusker, and that's open to all eligible employees. And by offering these alternatives to grey fleet, it provides us with greater control over the vehicle being used for business journeys. So it just provides a bit of reassurance that the vehicle's in a safe and serviceable condition. That's me. Back over to you, Emma.
That's great. Thanks very much, Lynn. Can I just ask a couple of follow-up questions, if that's all right? Just on, so you mentioned you've got 2,500 grey fleet drivers. What split is that between kind of occasional business use and then cash allowance? Do you have a cash allowance at Scottish Water?
So we do have a cash allowance. The majority do opt to take the car rather than a cash allowance. And then for people that are doing a lower mileage threshold, so anything between 3,000 to 9,000 would be offered a cash allowance. So it's the same checks that we would do, whether they're occasional drivers or whether they're cash allowance takers.
No, that's great. Thank you very much. Next slide, please, James. And I'm going to hand over to Matt Neale from Platform Housing Group.
Unmute myself. Good morning, everybody. As I said, I'm Matt Neale. I'm from Platform Housing Group. We're one of the largest housing associations in the UK. If you want to move on to the next slide, there we go. Yeah. So I'm just starting my journey with Grey Fleet within our organisation. So I've worked within Fleet for about 18 years. However, my organisation have been managing Grey Fleet, but probably not how it hasn't sat within the Fleet team. So it's now been moved over to myself to sort out. We currently have around 1,600 employees who may drive for business. So I say may because lots of our organisation do use their own vehicle to drive for work. The majority of our organisation are now hybrid following COVID. So 95% of our employees work from home, and they all claim business miles to go into offices or to attend our schemes and houses, etc. We do have a split of different workers within our organisation. So 500 of our vehicles are currently leased, and they are commercial vehicles. So that's our bread and butter. These are the guys that go out to the properties to fix the tenants' boilers and electricians, etc. We have 100 agency workers roughly as well, and we treat those as Grey Fleet drivers in the respect that we make sure they follow the same checks as a Grey Fleet driver that works for our organisation does as well, from a due diligence point of view. And we also have 1,000 employees that can commute for business purposes. So what I mean by that is these employees don't currently have a cash allowance, but they can at any point jump in their own vehicle and drive on business travel, whether that be just visiting one of our schemes or whether that's going into the office. In order for them to actually claim their mileage, we've now taken it over in the fleet department to make sure that we follow some due diligence checks, basically to make sure that they're actually compliant to do so. For those 1,000 employees as well, we do have we've just launched a green salary sacrifice scheme as well to support that, which I think we'll come on to a little bit later on. The similar to Elaine, part of the compliance check-in, we do have license check-in. So we've adopted a fleet management system that allows us to check automatically. So we'll do one check and then it picks it up automatically depending on the ratio we set in the background. So if somebody has more points than another, we get alerted, but also they get checked more frequently. We're currently in the process of writing a policies and processes within our organisation, so everybody fully understands the importance, including our directors. So it needs to be fed from the top down, and I think that's really important, and that's something that we'll be addressing internally to make sure that we get the full sponsorship of our board members to agree to the Grey Fleet management policy internally. And we've used the AFP article as well for anybody that hasn't read it yet to support with that. So if you haven't, then pop over to that and have a look at that document. One of the misconceptions, I think a lot of people think, if you've just got your own insurance, it's okay to drive for work, and it's not. You do need to put business travel on there. People think it's just going to cost lots more money, and more often than not, it doesn't cost any more. I've actually tested it myself and added it on and took it off. I know every individual's different, but I think you'll be shocked if you do travel for work by adding it on. It's more of a what if as opposed to we always try and encourage everyone to be covered more so than not. The MOT is obviously a standard compliance check. So our fleet management system allows us to, it alerts us to anybody that's due an MOT. So we send out complimentary emails and messages to get individuals to support with that. And vehicle selection is another one as well. So of old, I suppose, a lot of people determine a vehicle selection by age, whereas there's different NCAP ratings now that we can adopt. So those are all the sorts of things that will be included in our policy moving forward. And as I say, it's I'm at the start of the journey within this organisation that I currently work in, but the message is being read loud and clear by our board members. I think they fully understand the importance of how that can be, how it's a compliance issue, and something that ultimately a director will be responsible for within our organisation.
Really interesting. Thanks, Matt. What was the first thing, or what is the first thing you think you're going to be doing when taking control of the grey fleet within your business?
So first of all, we'll be reaching out to all of our current employees and just doing like an audit or doing a check on everybody that has. So we haven't failed to contact all of our employees. We have got contact with them all. I just don't think it's been kept as up to date as it should do. And I think we just need to run that sense check and have an audit across our organisation to make sure everybody's compliant. And for me personally, as a fleet manager, I want that peace of mind. And then what we'll also do is add that into our fleet management system then, again, which will then remind us as and when we need to be updating those drivers moving forward, or when we need updates on their insurance policies, etc.
And is it going to be an annual thing going forward then, that you require updates on insurance, MOT, tax, etc.?
So the tax and MOT, so because we use a fleet management system, the MOT and the tax automatically update, so it feeds into auto data. So if you've not got a fleet management system internally, I'd recommend you getting one. There's lots of different organisations out there, and I'm sure the AFP can recommend some. We add the vehicle reg into our system, and then it automatically populates via a system called auto data. So it feeds the information through. So you don't even need to check, it can actually alert you. So that's a really positive. The you can run reporting, and you get notifications when you put a date in to say your insurance is due to go out of date. So again, you can populate that. And the license checking, you can set the frequency within the system. So we personally, if you've got 3 points and less, it checks itself automatically every 12 months. If you've got 6 or more, up to 6, it's every 6 months. And if you've got 9 points or more on your license, it checks itself automatically every 3 months. Generally, just purely on a risk basis. As an organisation, we want to say.
I know you're going to be looking at kind of reviewing your existing policy, because you've been quite honest and said you're kind of at the start of this journey. It's probably more of a question for Elaine, really. Within your policy, Elaine, kind of what parameters have you got in regards to, I don't know, restrictions or requirements on vehicles that are used on business that are privately owned?
So we don't have any restrictions at the moment, apart from, it's more from the environmental perspective.
Okay.
So all of our sort of pool cars, all of our lease car scheme now is now electric. But in terms of personal vehicles, we don't set any age restriction or any CO2 limit for personal cars.
Okay, fab. I think Matt Hammond is waiting in the wings, who's going to be talking a little bit more about policy on that. So Matt, could I hand over to you now, please?
Certainly can, waiting very patiently. Do you want to skip on to the next slide for me, please? So I think, my two fellow panelists here have covered a lot of the points, and a lot of good points have been raised today. I think what we've got to remember is when we're talking grey fleet, you have to treat grey fleet drivers like any other driver. The checks and balances that we put in place for maybe our company car drivers or our van drivers should be no different to what we put in place for our grey fleet drivers. There was a stat that's at the top of that slide that was out a couple of years ago. So only 38% of directors said that they routinely check their grey fleet. This is something that's becoming bigger across businesses and is coming to the forefront. And we have to make sure, like I say, you can't just assume it's their car, it's their problem. That doesn't wash anymore. We've got a duty of care, health and safety at work act says that. We've got to make sure that we are compliant, we are treating everybody equally, we make sure all the checks and balances are in place. But I think one thing I want to pick up on is we've spoke about grey fleet. We've all said grey fleet, but grey fleet can take a couple of different guises, if you like. And I suppose there's the two main areas if you're talking grey fleet. You've got your occasional user, your person in the office who might nip out every now and again to go and do do the post or just nip to another office, and they'll use their own vehicle. We'll pay them back at probably AMAP rate, and then you've got your cash allowance takers, your grey fleet cash allowance takers, who is more of a structured. You give them a cash allowance instead of a company car, and they normally get something like an AFR rate. Now, while we put the same checks and balances in place for the ones that Elaine and Matt have spoken about, cover all these, how we manage those drivers, I think, is sometimes very different. And what we need to do as a business, and what we need to remember as a business, is we've got to put a scheme in place that suits not just the business, but suits both these areas. We can't expect somebody who's getting a £300, £400, £500 a month cash allowance. We can't put the same limitation on them as we put on somebody who doesn't get anything. Or should I put that the other way around? We can't put the same limitation on somebody who doesn't get the cash allowance as somebody who does. The cash allowance is there as a replacement for a company car, and we need to understand that. So when we build our policy, we need to put all these layers in place. But I think that the most important thing is there, you've got to be strict with your policy. We all have experienced people within our businesses normally have a director title, although I'm not pointing any fingers at anybody, who want to do certain things within your business. Matt touched it there. You know, these schemes have got to lead from the top. If you're going to put a scheme in place, it's got to be as good for the sales guys as it is for the managing director, and everybody's got to buy into these schemes when you put them in place. And that's how you've got to run this type of business. So if we just look at the cash allowance drivers for a minute, and I want to sort of focus a little bit on maybe how we manage that scheme. So if we just flick to my next slide, please. So here we go. It's cartoon time for you now. Lighten the mood a little bit. So we're going to just look through how we put together a company car scheme and why we put together a company car scheme. So you can see there we've got our newly promoted account manager there. We'll call her Emma for no other reason. It's the first name that came to my head. Now we all know Emma. She likes a flash car. So Emma's just got this cash allowance scheme. She's getting all excited. You know, out she goes, and she's deciding she's going to go and treat herself and buy herself a Porsche, because why not? She deserves one. But as a company, you know, the grumpy sales fleet manager that we are, we have to put limitations in place. We give Emma a cash allowance, and we give her the cash allowance because it's an alternative company car. So in our mind, we want to keep with that same company image. We want to keep that same company profile across the business. So we don't want Emma driving around in a Porsche, because all our customers will say we pay too much and they won't give us our price increase when it comes to it. So we say, you can't have that, Emma. It's got to have 4 seats. That's safe. You've got to be able to transport customers. You've got to be practical car for practical business use. That's fine, says Emma. So away she goes. She comes back with her second choice, which is a nice 4-seater Ford. Fortunately, it's a convertible Mustang. Now, again, nothing wrong with the car. It's probably a safe car. It's a perfectly good car. But as a company, we don't want to have image. Again, we've got to think of the bigger business. So we say, okay, that's great, Emma, but no convertibles, no kit cars. So let's be a bit more sensible. Emma's getting a bit annoyed with me now, so she goes as far.
Yeah, you're a terrible fleet manager. Blimey. I want my autonomy and choice.
So we go further. So she comes back with a classic. Let's have a classic, you know, 4-seater. It's got a roof. Why can't you have that? Now, there's an argument to say we put an age limit in place. Do we say a car's going to be under 5 years old, 6 years old, 7 years old, whatever it might be? But you can flip that argument on its head. Cars are getting safer. We all know a 6-year-old BMW is probably as safe as a 2-year-old BMW. You know, why can't you have a 7-year-old car that's only got 30,000 miles on it, or can have a 2-year-old car that's got 130,000 miles on it? There isn't much of an argument, or there's a hard argument. So what we do, and Matt again touched on it earlier, we look at the NCAP. Let's put it on a safety side. You know, so we say all vehicles on fleet must be NCAP 4 or 5. We wouldn't put a company car on scheme that wasn't 4 or 5. So why would we then, going back to the duty of care thing, say, well, cash, you can do what you want? So we put these layers in place, and we start to build this scheme, and we start to build this scheme that's in line with where we roughly build the company car scheme, because ultimately, like I say, this is for the cash takers. The cash takers getting the cash into the car. So let's try and keep it in line. Now, some might want to put a maximum mileage on that. That's obviously down to personal preference. I think as long as the car's serviced and maintained and within the other criteria, I think you can be flexible on your mileage. But again, that's kind of how, from a cash viewpoint, we will look at a company car scheme. The other side, the occasional users, the AMAP 45p. Well, you can't impose this type of limit on these people because ultimately they're not getting the cash. They might only be doing a limited company mileage a year. So we have to look at them differently. And one thing we put in place, and I think Elaine touched on this earlier, if you're going to use your company car to go to the post office or go to another regional office, let's put pool cars in place. Can we put a pool car available? Is there actually a company vehicle parked in the car park all day long that they could use to go and do that journey? And if there isn't, do we put a limit on the amount of miles these AMAP drivers are doing? You know, do we want these people going out and doing 30,000 miles on AMAP? I mean, not just because of the cost, but actually, is that the safest way to put a driver on the road for high mileage, which we're not fitting within something like we've got on the screen there, within one of these criteria, these bandits? So we have to assess the two areas of grey fleet in a very, very different way. But ultimately, they all sit under the duty of care umbrella. How you approach it within your business and how you best manage those, you know, it is obviously business by business specific. Matt touched on there, he's got 1,000 grey fleet drivers who will sit under the AMAP scheme. Now, that's a lot of drivers to manage in what is a very loosely regulated scheme. Okay, we cover it for compliance, but how would we filter that down? And that's from a business viewpoint where we look at what's the cost of that. Is there a tipping point within the cost of these AMAP drivers that say, actually, we're better to put them on into a cash allowance scheme or even into a company car scheme, especially with the BIK coming down on electric vehicles and the cost coming down. So all these parts we need to assess, we need to analyse, we need to understand what fits where and where we draw the lines on each of these grey fleet schemes to make it safe and suitable for each business. And that's
great. Matt, do you align I mean, we've touched a lot around kind of safety and the reasons why we've put age limits or NCAT ratings on our cash allowance population. Are we also seeing more, or are you finding more that actually we are also aligning our cash allowance to our environmental considerations as well with our company car policies?
Yeah, it's a massive thing. And as we come into scope 3, you know, this is going to be some of the businesses are going to have to declare their CO2 limits. And you know, we all want to do the right thing. We're moving company car schemes to hybrids and electrics. Why don't we incentivize the cash guys to go that way? And I think you're going to touch on it in a few minutes about salary sacrifice schemes. You know, we're offering those in the business where we can bring those along and go. This is a cleaner alternative for you, and it gives you an incentive. We're also looking at potentially giving people an enhanced cash allowance if they go to a cleaner car. And the other thing that we are in the throes of debate at the moment is putting a CO2 cap on our cash allowance drivers as well. So I think you've got to be more environmentally aware of your entire fleet now, not just your company cars, but it filters all the way across to the entire fleet.
And you are finding that environmental considerations are getting more traction at board level than potentially safety might be, just because of the focus and the spotlight that we're seeing around electrification and reducing our CO2 and the whole kind of ESG agenda that's going on within businesses at the moment?
It's huge. It's absolutely huge. And I was talking to somebody about this yesterday. You go back 3 years and we were talking about reducing your accident stats, you know, getting the best CO2 vans on fleet, where we're going to get the best deals, what we're looking at. And suddenly that whole mind shift has changed now to all about CO2. It's all about the carbon footprint of fleet. Look, for most businesses, and ours included, fleet covers probably 70-80% of our entire carbon footprint. So we are always going to be in the spotlight on that. And you can't just go, okay, we'll look at our vans, we'll ignore the grey fleet, we'll not worry about trucks now. You've got to encompass it all. And that's from your AMAP drivers all the way up to your HGV drivers.
That's really interesting. Just going back to the safety piece, I know everyone's spoken about having consistency between what you do for your company car fleet drivers, your commercial vehicle drivers, as well as your grey fleet and cash. What your driver education and training, is there any difference between what you do for your company provided vehicle drivers and what you do for your cash or occasional business drivers? What does that look like? That I'm asking the whole panel on that question.
Yeah, we don't differentiate between our drivers. You know, we have certain schemes in place. We have training, we have e-learning. We have one-to-one driver training, we have classroom courses, and if you are, we don't even look at what you're driving. You're an authorised driver within our business, so you will fall within our driver training profile. And I think that's one of the things that we've got to make sure that you cover. Like I think we touched on earlier, you can't differentiate between, oh, you're a grey fleet driver, so if you crash, it's your insurance, it doesn't matter. Of course it matters. You know, yes, it's your cost, your insurance, but it's our downtime, it's our duty of care to make sure they're as safe as possible. So yeah, we don't differentiate between anything like that.
That's really interesting. Can we have the next slide, please, James? Just before we go on to a Q&A with our panelists, I know we've already kind of asked some questions, and thank you for those people that have posed some questions to us already. James, can you confirm that we are able to do the poll right now? Ah, fantastic.
Yeah,
yes.
Just launched it. Thank you.
Wonderful. So this kind of came up when we were planning this webinar. It was actually raised by Matt and Neale around, would we find it of benefit for some sort of certification or qualification or education, formal education or learning around how to manage grey fleet, because there absolutely is, a lack of understanding and potentially a lack of awareness within some businesses. So, poll question to our audience this morning. Do you think attending a grey fleet training or awareness course or similar with the AFP and obtaining a certification of completion would be valuable? I just need to caveat that question with saying that isn't a certification to say that your grey fleet is compliant. It's a qualification or a certification that actually you've had that education and awareness, and you're then in a position to go and manage that effectively within your own organisation. Would that be of value to you as a member of the AFP? If you could vote, that would be great. Just give you a couple of minutes. What we'll do is we'll take a look at the results after the webinar and share that with you, and it could be something that the AFP consider including within their training portfolio at a later date. James, is that included now? We're still waiting.
Yeah, we've had 76% have actually done it. So yeah, so we could give it 10 more seconds and then we'll.
No problem at all.
Yeah, 80%. So thanks for that.
Brilliant. Thank you, everyone. So on to the Q&A. I've asked a couple of questions, like I've said, while we've kind of carried on, but there are a couple more that I'd like to put to the panelists this morning. We've touched on salary sacrifice as an alternative to grey fleet. Why might we want to have an alternative to grey fleet? What are the benefits of salary sacrifice, and what other alternatives do you have within your organisations to de-risk your grey fleet?
I think salary sacrifice for the drivers gives them that additional option. I don't think it's an either or. I think it's an as well as tool. It more aligns with the company car scheme than the AMAP occasional user scheme. But I think it gives people an option. It gives people that security that they're going to get an environmentally sustainable car. They're going to get maintenance with it, they're going to get insurance with it, which is critical. It's a nice all-rounded package for somebody, and you're going to get a 20 or 40% less than it will cost you if you walked into a dealer. So what's not to like?
Fantastic. Any other comment, Elaine, Matt?
I think just touching on what I'd said earlier on, so we do have that as an alternative for salary sacrifice and full cars. And our lease car scheme, and I think it's just apart from so the employee gets that hassle-free motoring because everything's included within that monthly fee, but from a business perspective you get a better reassurance that the vehicle is in a fit and roadworthy condition, and you've got greater control over what type of vehicle they use over somebody that's claiming business mileage. So yeah, certainly a good option.
Absolutely. Elaine, what did you find was the biggest, or is your biggest challenge in managing grey fleet, and how do you overcome that?
So I think really it's about, so when we'd first started this journey, really, if I'm honest, probably about maybe just 10 years ago now, we'd moved from a position where we were still checking physical licenses at the time before it had moved online. That was devolved to our line managers, our operational line managers across the business, to physically check that, that card or bit of paper. So I think really it was that culture change, and we've seen a lot of technology move on over the last 10 years. So I think it was getting into that culture, that mindset that we were going to help and support. I think that's a big piece of this. You're taking away some of that onus and responsibility that's placed on team leaders. They've got a lot of operational considerations, certainly for ourselves, they've got to manage. So it's taking that burden away from them and giving them that reassurance that we're checking everything we should, not just for the driving license, but for the vehicle itself. But you've really got to get that buy-in. Somebody mentioned it earlier from their kind of directors or your senior leaders within the business as well, because it is it does take time and resource to not just implement, but also to continue to manage that. Even if you do have a fleet management system in place, it takes time and effort to keep that up to date. So I think that's it. It's just about trying to really explain what we touched on, what our duty of care, what our regulatory or legal requirements are under the Health and Safety Act. So trying to communicate that in the business, get some buy-in, and then put something in that's easy for people to manage, that makes sure that you've got that confidence.
Absolutely. It's really important, like you've said, to have that top-down commitment and engagement. But what do you do, Elaine, and what do you do, Matt, in regards to educating those drivers? Because I know when I used to work on the customer side of things, that actually there was a real lack of awareness within my grey fleet driver population. It was quite hard to get that message out. So how do you educate your drivers so that they are compliant and that they are willing to provide you with the information that they need to in order for you as an employer to be compliant?
Which Matt Hammond?
I've started now, mate. You'll have to wait. I think we designed a portal, so we made it very much a driver-focused system. So we did a lot of work at the beginning to understand what was expected. You just carrot and stick a little bit, and you almost have to sort of threaten people with stopping the cash allowance if they don't do it. As soon as they don't get money, they seem to sort of remember to put the documents on the system. But ours is very much a driver-led system now, so they've got to log in, they go on, it automatically reminds them when certain dates are due, MOT dates, insurance dates, so they can go on the latest system. We obviously have a back office system that picks that up as well, so we can give them a nudge. But I think it's just I say once you realise they're not going to get the money if they don't do it, they tend to do it, and they just keep on top of it. I think we're in a fortunate position now that we've had a cash allowance scheme in place for long enough. We've gone through the issues of it not working to settle on a nice rhythm that works for us, and it kind of just ticks over. So it's just a perseverance thing of finding what works for each individual business, really.
No, that's great. I've got a question from Saul Gold for all three presenters. So if you could each answer in turn, that would be great. Do you or should you have a way of understanding the levels of driving safety for your grey fleets? Yeah, I'm guessing that's in regards to capturing accidents and collisions and things like that.
Yeah, I think as part of your risk-based approach, I think it was Neale had mentioned this earlier. So that's really what we've done for our grey fleet. In fact, for all of our drivers, is take a risk-based approach. So depending on what type of asset they're driving, depending on how many points they've got, will determine the frequency of checks that are completed for licenses. So one way of identifying risk is somebody that's got higher points on their license and trying to understand what that's for as well. Is it mobile phone use? Is it speeding? And then trying to provide targeted training off the back of that. But there is also a piece, I think it was Matt Hammond had mentioned about, not treating drivers differently. So we carry out what we call a road traffic incident, an RTI investigation off the back of any business journey where there's been an accident occurred. And it's the same for our grey fleet. So it's just trying to get the metrics that work for you, for your grey fleet. So certainly for us, it would be license checks and number of incidents.
Anything further on from the other panelists?
No, I think Elaine covered it, to be fair.
Fantastic. I have another question from Paul Hammond. Where there has been a cost-based analysis that dictates an upper mileage to suggest moving AMAP to AFR, do any of the panel set a minimum mileage limit on grey fleet management for AMAP drivers?
Interestingly, we've just implemented this, but they've not discussed it with fleet. So our HR team have implemented a new, they've moved everybody off AMAP to AFR, and if you do up to, I think it's up to 4,000 miles, you then can claim, you get like £150 cash allowance. So they're starting to introduce a small cash allowance, which at the moment, with the cost of fuel and things like that, it's kind of a bit of a grey area, excuse the pun, but it's a bit of a grey area in our organisation because of with the cost of living rises and everything like that. The kind of cash allowance doesn't really outweigh the AFR rates that they're claiming. So we have introduced something, but I don't think it's necessarily been thought about in a lot of detail. So it's something I'm kind of pushing back on within our organisation to truly understand it and make sure it's like a fully robust. I don't think the cost-based analysis has been done properly, I don't think, personally.
Okay. Interesting. Any further comment from Elaine or Matt Hammond on that one?
When you're looking at minimum mileage or maximum mileage and this whole cost analysis, I think as we move into the more sustainable fleet field and you start looking at your CO2 issues and environmental issues, then these are naturally going to get captured. You know, as we're moving people into what are more expensive electric cars, let's not go into the whole TCO argument, but as we're looking at it, we are sort of saying, should this person be having one if they are doing, I don't know, 3,000 business miles a year, or is there a better option for the business? Should we just inflate the salary on that person, take that perk away, and they can utilise a pool car, they can utilise a short-term hire car, this sort of thing. So when you look at your whole carbon footprint, I think that's where you're going to capture that sort of minimum sort of mileage limit, really.
That's interesting, thank you. Do you guys anticipate that your grey fleet is going to get bigger? There has been talk in the media about the increase in grey fleet, especially post-pandemic. Is that something that you are seeing, something that you are, I guess, accepting, or something that you are trying to mitigate within your organisations?
I feel
Go on, Matt.
Sorry, I feel personally ours has just increased purely because of COVID. So since COVID, our organisation took the decision to become 95% home workers. So overnight, everybody became effectively a grey fleet driver, because all of a sudden they start travelling for work and they claim business mileages. The business made that decision to pay everybody business mileages for travelling to our offices or to our locations. So overnight, we kind of adopted like nearly 1,000 grey fleet drivers, whereas before COVID, a lot of people were office-based, so it wasn't necessarily to that ratio, but it's kind of just adopted. But it's just, I suppose, one of the decisions our organisation's made to allow everybody to become a hybrid working.
So with your hybrid working within your organisation, did their contractual office base change then, Matt? Did their employee contract change so that it went to your, okay. Because we've employed a similar thing at BWFS where we've, go on.
My personal contract, so my contract is home-based, and then everybody else's was amended to become a home-based scenario. So you actually get questions now if you want an office-based role. So if I'm recruiting for an office-based role, they ask why do you want that and why do you need it? So it's more, which is just, it's obviously it's completely different times, wasn't it, to pre-pandemic.
We've adopted a similar thing in regards to hybrid working, but what our contract of employment at BWFS hasn't changed. So we are still contracted at the office, which means that we can still be hybrid working. So we have a 20% requirement in the office, so 1 day a week minimum. But I guess we've avoided that situation where suddenly we've had an increase in grey fleet drivers, because contractually we're still office based. So anytime we do go into the office, it's still considered a commute and therefore not grey fleet or business journey. So I guess there are two ways to approach it. Obviously, the way that you guys have done, but you don't necessarily have to change your employee contracts to home based if you are operating a hybrid working model. I've had a question from Mike Norwood. Are people checking for previously written off vehicles being used as grey fleet? Also, what are your views as a panel on ensuring that the duty of care to a grey fleet driver is met in the event of an incident, and ensuring the vehicle is correctly repaired before coming back on the road?
On the second part, I'll pick the second part up. Yes, we do have a duty of care to make sure it's correctly repaired. How you enforce that is a difficult one, because you're not using your same repair network that you use for your company vehicles. You can't force somebody to take a certain route to repair a vehicle. You can only put in a process and a policy to say that you strongly recommend it should be a whatever registered repairer that they use. What I like to think, and what we tend to see is, especially with our cash drivers, because of the criteria we put in place, because of the age limitations and the NCAP rates and other type of vehicles that these guys have got, that these cars tend to be slightly more, how can I say, technical than an older car. So it has to go to a specialist repairer to be repaired. So you kind of capture it from that side. I think what the risk comes when you start opening that criteria up, and when you start looking at your occasional user drivers where you don't have that age cap limit. So it might be an older car which you can fix with a sledgehammer and a bit of gaffer tape, then that's a bit of a different situation. And how you police that will always be a difficult one.
Does anyone want to pick up the first question from Mike around, are people checking for previously written off vehicles being used for grey fleet? Has this come, I know I watched a recent Panorama documentary, I think it was Panorama, might have been Dispatches on this, where more and more the second-hand market is being flooded by vehicles that have been involved in serious collisions and have then been written off, but are then being repaired and obviously sold. And it is a risk for people that are, grey fleet and are buying these second-hand vehicles. I guess my response would be, as a business, we have to do what is reasonably practicable. And I think that's a really crucial term in the Health and Safety at Work Act. We can advise, we can guide, but would it be reasonably practicable to, check the history of every single grey fleet vehicle within our organisation? I'm not sure whether that is. I don't know if the panel's got any comments on that.
I don't think it is, and I think you've got to at some point go, yes, as a business we have a duty of care, but this is somebody's using their own cash to buy this vehicle. Now, we talk about written off vehicles and everybody's got a vision in their head of a mangled car that's going to be panel beaten out by some dodgy backstreet garage and put back on the road. But actually, when you talk about it now and the regulations that are in place, you could have a written off vehicle that was class N, which is a non-structural repair. So it might have been flooded. It might have had an engine fire. It might be something that's non-structural, non-integral to that vehicle, that is panel damage or it's water damage or something that can quite easily be put back on the road. And it's not potentially not going to impact any safety issues at all. You could have an S, which is a structural damage vehicle, which, then you need serious body shop work to put back straight. But again, if that vehicle has gone through a body shop and that has gone through a registered jig straight and a registered company that can do that, and they have to get it checked. And don't forget, all these have to then go through a government inspected test before they are deemed safe to be back on the road. Then you got to go, well, that's down to the person's money that they're going to pay. Do they want to say, I'm going to get it for £1,000 less, knowing that it's had an impact, it's had a damage, but it's got the certification it's gone through, or do they not? So I think as a business, the regulations are quite tight behind putting a damaged vehicle back on the road. A cut and shuts are very few and far between. Most of the ones actually are going through the regulations, are regulated, and they have an S or an N. And for me, I think that's down to the driver's decision if they want to put themselves in that position.
No, there is absolutely an onus still on the driver. Like in a company provided vehicle, there is still an onus for them to drive safely and responsibly. you're not potentially liable for everything that driver does behind the wheel. You just have to put the right checks, measures, policies and procedures in place to make sure that you are, again, doing what is reasonably practicable as an employer to ensure safety when driving.
Yeah.
If there's no more questions from our audience, if we could just go to the couple final few slides, please, James. So just really to kind of leave on 5 key points. Thank you all for joining us today. So just thinking in summary, and people on the panel, please do add and comment on things. I think there are 5 key kind of takeaways here in regards to managing grey fleet. So 1, identify your grey fleet vehicles and those drivers within your organisation. It's easy to identify your cash allowance drivers, they'll be on the payroll, but those occasional business drivers can sometimes be quite challenging to identify. They may not always claim that mileage to the post office on the way home, for example. Have a clear and robust policy that enforces minimum standards and requirements. Really, really important to have that, again, with top-down commitment from your board of directors or board of management. Record driver and vehicle documentation. Offer alternatives to grey fleet, so salary sacrifice, pool vehicles, use of other company vehicles that might be in your car park that are available. De-risk that grey fleet if you can. And then finally, provide driver risk assessments and training. We've already touched on everything that you do for your company provided vehicles, and drivers of those vehicles should be applicable to your grey fleet and cash allowance drivers as well. They should have the same access and risk assessment because they're also undertaking business journeys. Next slide, please, James. So we do have 2 guidance documents that are available in the AFP members area. I highly recommend taking a look at those, downloading those. There's some really useful information in there, hints and tips, advice on policy, advice on driver engagement and communications, and it will complement quite nicely what we've been discussing today. So really useful resource. You might want to take a look at that online. Next slide, please, James. And I will hand over to Martin for our closing and an update on the AFP.
Thank you, Emma. I hope everybody's found today's session really interesting. I certainly have, and the different challenges our different fleet managers are facing and how they're overcoming these challenges. Just to reiterate, the AFP, we're here for you as fleet operators, fleet managers, and people within the fleet industry. And on that vein, obviously we do lots of training courses, so hopefully you found today's session really informative. We've got some up and coming training sessions, and we've still got some spaces on those. So obviously first one, I'm just reading out from the presentation here, the transition to electric LCV, which is 1-day course on the 22nd of November. So we've still got some spaces for that one. And we've still got some spaces for making the switch to electric vehicles. Again, a 1-day course the day after, 23rd of November in Surrey. And the vehicle fleet management strategic course kicks off on the 15th and 16th of November in Farnborough. So if you have been kind of listening and thinking, what can I do? What tools do I need to better do my job? These courses are really good, and they're really designed to help you, give you the tools that can make your life easier dealing with these challenges. We're also attending the Fleet and Mobility Live at the NEC on the 11th and 12th of October. So we've got an AFP lounge there. So most of the board directors will be in and out of the lounge. So it'd be great to see anybody, any of you, to come and say hi and have a chat. And if there's anything further you want to talk about regarding the AFP or our training courses, or things that you think that perhaps we need to cover off or put in our agendas, please do come and say hello and have a coffee with us. We've got the AGM 4 o'clock on the 11th as well. Again, more than welcome to attend. We've also got a dinner for the fleet operator members on the 11th of October at Hampton Manor. So we've had good people wanting to attend that. So got good attendance, but there's still a few spaces left. So you will have had an email from us about that event. So if you do want to attend, please get back to us on that, and hopefully we can fill those last few spaces. So that's it from me. Hope you've had a great session, and thank you to our panel. It's been great. You've made some fantastic presentations. Thank you very much. Okay, thanks to everybody